And as is usual, I light the chalice candle. So welcome to you all, and may we be reminded here of our highest aspirations and inspired to bring our gifts of love and service to the altar of humanity. May we know once again that we are not isolated beings, but connected in mystery and miracle to the universe, to this community, and to each other. The theme for this week, for this service, is Deaf Awareness, and this is the last day of Deaf Awareness Week, and their theme this year was inclusion. Following on from Reverend Kate's service 2 weeks ago, when she talked about widening the circle or active hospitality, I thought this service would fit in nicely and make us all think a little. The service is about inclusion for deaf and hearing impaired people and children. Yes, we do have a hearing loop, as I know from David from before. But is that really enough? We have to look at ourselves too and how we interact with the deaf and hearing impaired, and I'll come back to this later. During this service there will be some signing, but please remember not all deaf people sign, and that was pointed out to me some time ago. The service actually is a joint service by 4 of us who started learning to sign, by a lady called Elizabeth, who it's her lifetime's work, working for the deaf community. So the 4 of us are Suzanne here and myself. We're Unitarians. Hazel is a community worker that helps a lot with the work in the cafe. And Jude is another friend who's learning to sign, and she wouldn't step inside a church or a religious institution if you paid her, unless it was for fundraising. So this service is a little eclectic, and I hope something from this service will stay with you when the service finishes. And it is quite a musical service because I put 3 hymns in as well. So raise your voices and stand if you're able for the first hymn, which is number 147, Spirit of Earth, Stone and Tree. Oh, and it's the purple.
Energy.
Suzanne has written a thought for the day, the prayers, and a poem for this service. So, Suzanne, over to you.
The way I see it is that our deaf friends cannot hear nature, but they can smell nature. So I invite everyone to have a sniff at this morning's flowers before coffee and tea time. Thought for the day. When you are in church this morning and you feel that temptation to point out what's wrong with the place, the coffee's lukewarm, the lights are too bright, the temperature's wrong, the music is too loud, and of course, you don't know the songs. Remember, in that moment, there's a Eucharian church gathering in subway tunnels to worship while bombs blast overhead. No coffee, no instruments, no leader pushing them to worship. They're down there in real time and in real life, worshiping their King above all kings. As the world is crumbling down, they don't deserve that. No one does. Our prayers be with them. It is through prayer that every day we may open the door a little wider and come a little nearer to understanding who we are and what our lives are really for. Let us pray. Help me today to realize that you will be speaking to me through the events of the day, through people, through things, and through creation. God, grant me the sincerity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. Thanks be to God. Now I should like to share with you a poem. It's called The God I Know. When an artist steps aside to share their creation, they leave some of themselves within that creation. I sense God in the silence after a wave has smashed against the rocks. The sun that beams down touches warmly my face. The blackbird's song after a storm, and the lambs dancing with delight on the moor. In the music softly playing when I am sad, the God I know, yeah, is there. Thanks for listening.
Thank you so much, Suzanne, for writing those and reading them.
You're welcome.
And now for our second hymn, because you sang so beautifully, you can sing even louder. So stand if you are able and sing really loudly if you're on Zoom. So it's 142, Shining Through the Universe. Purple book. And again...
Cooling water, burning fire, metal wood. north to southern pole. If you trace the golden thread, the way will come your soul. Turn your feet along the way, sages taught of old. Live life well and tread the path marked by the thread of gold.
I think that was beautifully sung, so you can sit down. And as always, we have a story. And the story is going to be read by Myron, and it's called Freddy and the Fairy. It was bought for me at Christmas by my deaf friend, and we were both early years teachers, so it's an early years story. She bought me two, actually, and they've both been reviewed by the hearing impaired children at Notre Dame School, and Freddy and the Fairy came out the top. But you have to listen and look very carefully, and if the pictures of the book will come up on the screen, so if you can't see, maybe move over, because the illustrations are beautiful, and it's going to be read very well by our actor Myron. Thank you.
Freddy and the Fairy by Julia Donaldson and Karen George. Freddy found a fairy tangled in a tree. "Help, I'm stuck," the fairy cried. So Freddy set her free. Yes. "Thank you," said the fairy. "My name is Bessie Bell. I'll grant you all three wishes, though I can't hear very well." Freddy thought, then mumbled, "I wish I had a pet." "Why, so you shall," said Bessie Bell, and conjured up a net. "I don't want fish," said Freddy. "I'd rather have a dog." "Hey presto," said the fairy, and conjured up a frog. "Let's try again," said Freddy. "I wish I had a cat." "That's easy," said the fairy, and conjured up a bat. "I don't like bats," said Freddy. "But what about a mouse?" "Lift up that stone," the fairy said. And Freddy found a louse. "That isn't right," said Freddy. "Let's think. Perhaps a parrot." "I'll do my best," said Bessie Bell, and conjured up a carrot. Freddy stamped his foot and said, "This carrot has no beak." "Forgive me," said the fairy, and a tear rolled down her cheek. Just then, from out of nowhere, appeared the fairy queen. She dried the fairy's eyes and asked, "Whatever does this mean?" "It's Bessie Bell," said Freddy. "She gets things wrong," he grumbled. "I'm sorry," said the fairy, "but that's because you mumbled." "Now, Freddy," said the fairy queen. She sounded kind but stern. "Before you wish again, there are 3 rules for you to learn. Rule 1, you mustn't mumble. Rule 2, don't turn away. The fairy needs to see your lips to read the words you say. Rule 3, don't cover up your mouth. she can't see through your hand. Obey these 3 gold rules and then I'm sure she'll understand. So Freddy learnt these 3 gold rules, and now he speaks quite clearly. And everything he wishes for comes true, or very nearly. A dog, a cat, a mouse, a bird. What next? A caterpillar? The fairy laughed and conjured up a very large gorilla.
Thank you, Myron. That was beautiful. And I think you all enjoyed it, but all learnt something from it as well. And I'll come back to that a bit later on. We're now going to have a 5-minute silent meditation. But this service is quite special to me because my best friend is deaf. So she was very pleased that I was going to do it. But of course, it made me even more nervous to kind of get things right for her, if you like. And also, I have to just put a plug here for a choir. It's called Hands in Harmony, BSL Choir. And they were signing before the show at the theatre Friday evening. And their members are a mix of deaf and hearing with differing BSL signing abilities. So if you ever come across Hands in Harmony Choir, do go and see them. So as I said earlier, a few of us have been learning sign language, although we are having a break now because it's quite intensive. And I, for one, can't remember everything, so I have to revise a lot. And I haven't been practicing as much as I should. But I wanted to learn to sign for 2 reasons. One, some of you may remember from my musings in the open road, but I'll tell you again in case you've forgotten. I was on my local bus one day. That is an amazing bus. Everything happens on the 25 bus. And 2 deaf visitors got on before 9:30. They obviously came from somewhere to visit Plymouth, and they came from somewhere where they could actually use their bus pass before 9:30. I'd seen them on the bus the day before in the afternoon. The bus driver was really horrid to them and was trying to throw them off the bus. I got up to pay for them, as did another person, and they sat down looking very, very embarrassed, as you can understand. When we all got off, we smiled at each other and they signed thank you. But I wished I could sign so as to tell them that nearly all Plymouth people are friendly and helpful, including most of the bus drivers. And they really are. It was just obviously this one had got out of bed the wrong way. But obviously the impact it had on this couple, it was very embarrassing. The other reason, as I've said before, my best friend is deaf, and she started to go deaf while we were teaching. And when my friend retired from teaching, she started working part-time at the V&A in London, and she worked as a gallery assistant, and they also put her on the main shop tills because she's got a bubbly personality. This was difficult, but she was very successful and she was one of the top earners on the tills. But it became very difficult when masks had to be worn. And the customers, she would say she was deaf, and the customers would take their masks off and lean very, very closely to her in this time of COVID, which was quite scary, really. A few weeks later, all the museums closed. This was safer, but then my friend wasn't interacting with anyone and became very isolated in lockdown. And it was very hard after lockdown for her to come out of that isolation. She now volunteers at the most wonderful theatre in Wimbledon, which I must visit, and it's called the Polka Theatre for Children. This theatre has recently been refurbished with all areas accessible, clear signage throughout, gender-specific and all-gender toilets available, as well as baby changing facilities. They're committed to providing relaxed shows for autistic or neurodiverse people, children, audio described and captioned shows for all shows where possible. And I was talking to her on the phone the other day. She's got a phone for the deaf, so at home, and she said for the first time in 12 years, she doesn't feel anxious going into a place. And she's quite a confident person, although I say that, everyone puts a front on, don't they? But she feels very comfortable being a volunteer at this theatre. And when meeting people, she now says, "Hello, I'm deaf, don't be embarrassed." And there are some assertive courses run for deaf people, so they can actually be more confident. Just like to say a little aside about really, the theatre did an amazing dance show called Plastic, Drastic, Fantastic. And my friend has got me the email of the director of the show, and I'm hoping that possibly we might get it down here. So I'm in the process of emailing the director. Most of us here are hearing, although some of us may be a bit hard of hearing, and hearing loss through age is very common. I'm sure a lot of us are unable to hear well when there is a lot of peripheral noise. I was at a birthday party some time ago and sitting at the end of a long table. It was a noisy restaurant, but I couldn't hear any of the conversations going on. In the end, I just switched off and just went into my own thoughts, really. But I'd like to tell you a story, another story actually, from America, and they use a different sign language, as do most countries. Most countries have their own version of sign language. So this is a story from America, and a true story. My best friend's parents were both deaf. They were great people that would do anything to help others. I loved spending time with my friend's family. Her mum had a gentleness about her, and a real knack for making me feel welcome and special. That was a big part of why I loved being with them. Because who doesn't want to feel special, right? Plus, I loved watching my friend sign for her mum. It was awesome, and it's one of the reasons I fell in love with American Sign Language, or ASL, in the first place. Those childhood memories still hold a special place in my heart. They always will. But there was a dark side to those times too. I remember how other mums treated my friend's mum. They chose not to see the loving, sweet person she was. To them, she was an outsider, someone to shun and toss aside at football games and parent-teacher association meetings, all because she was deaf. Thankfully, my mum taught me better, not by her words, but by her actions. She loved my friend's mum, so she made a point of sitting with her at those football games, buddying up with her at PTA meetings, and writing notes back and forth with her for hours. Basically being the kind of friend we all want, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. That doesn't sound really like a big deal, does it? But to someone who is ignored on a regular basis, being treated like a friend instead of an outcast can make all the difference in the world. I think that's an important story which makes us all think quite deeply. I've always been fascinated by the French Revolution. Now, where am I going with this, you wonder? Well, the French Revolution had a major impact on the development of British Sign Language. So that's interesting, isn't it? So Thomas Braidwood created the first formal sign language teaching institute, and he got his inspiration from a public school from Charles Michel de l'Épée, who is recognised as one of the pioneers of welfare educational services and a benefactor of humanity. Due to the example set by him, the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen, the core document forged out of the French Revolution, gave equal rights to deaf and dumb people, therefore enabling development of services and institutions serving their interests. So I thought that was fascinating because I have always been, I love French Revolution history. We also have a famous Unitarian who was a pioneer in the education of deaf people. His name was Charles Baker. He was born in 1803, and he dedicated his whole life to raise the condition of those who, deprived of hearing, have never attained, or if once attained, had lost the power of speech. He had found a lack of teaching materials for deaf and hearing impaired people, and he developed a set of graded books on reading and comprehension called The Circle of Life. I've left a few copies about him there because obviously I couldn't put all the history of him in this address. I've also left a few sheets there about how to communicate with deaf and hearing impaired people. Please take them on your way to coffee. And they're from an audiology clinic in San Francisco. But I'd like to close this address by saying, remember Freddy and the Fairy. Thank you for listening. And our final hymn is 128, Our World is One World. Stand if you're able, and sit if you wish.
Our world is one.
The benediction today is written by Cynthia Landrum, and she's a minister in Michigan. We leave this gathered community, but we don't leave our connection, our concerns or our cares for each other, our service to each other and to the world. Until we are together again, friends, be strong, be well, be true, be loving.